Hi everyone, welcome. My name is Marta. I'm a part of the committee of the Anti-Racism Advisory Group in the IASW. I'm very happy to see so many of you giving up your lunchtime to come and join us for this wonderful workshop. I'll be very brief. I know we only have 1 hour and I want us to utilize that hour as best as we can. So we usually like to do an anti-racism workshop every year or so, and usually attending to people's needs. Usually people come to us asking for very practical support. So we talked to Wayne Reid, who will be presenting today, and he offered to give us actually a very useful tool that he'll be talking all about it. For those who do not know Wayne, he has a lot of experience, frontline experience for over 20 years. He's done everything from child protection, probation, adult mental health, community settings, youth offending teams. He's done a bit of everything. You might have also come across his wonderful academic work and also his other public speaking and workshop trainings. He does a lot of that, and he's done some of those with us in the past, so you might recognize him here. And finally, I would really like to highlight that he's been a trailblazer when it comes to anti-racism work, especially in UK. He's been a huge inspiration for our group as well, and he's been a huge supporter in giving us, guidance and advice throughout the years. So we are so excited to have him here to support us further. Wayne, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you, Marta. Thanks so much for that lovely introduction. That's really nice. And it's nice to be back in Ireland, although albeit virtually. And it's nice to have the invitation again from yourselves. And, it's a pleasure to kind of collaborate between BASW England and IASW and this group. So thanks ever so much for the invitation. So I'm going to share my screen now and get straight into my presentation because I know that we're limited for time. I'm going to speak to you this afternoon about a new resource that's been developed called the Shades of Bias, a reflective case study template. And the slogan there is reveal, reflect and repair. And those are the different groups and organisations that are supportive of this resource. I'm not going to dwell on this slide, but just so you've got a brief insight into my social work background, Marta has kindly given you an overview already, so I'm not going to dwell on that too much. But I have been around for a little bit in social work and done a few bits and bobs, shall we say, and I'm very proud of the social work background that I have. My organisation is BASW, the British Association of Social Workers. Again, I'm not going to dwell on this slide, but I am going to let it just sit there for a second. These are some of the work streams that we're involved in BASW England. Again, I won't labour these. They are available on our website. You will also get a copy of this presentation, so you'll be able to look at this in more depth at your leisure. Just a few more there. And the point I'd like to emphasise is that we're very much about collective professional identity and promoting that in social work. What you can expect from this presentation, I'm going to tell you about what Shades of Bias is, what its origins are, how it can be utilised more widely. There's a section specifically for people responsible for bias, and then there's a summary and a few infographics to consolidate what I've had to say. And then I'll get into a discussion with both Marta and Nisarg around their views of the Shades of Bias case study template. And then there'll be an opportunity for questions, and I'll also share some relevant BASW England work streams with you that relate to this resource. So what is Shades of Bias, SOB? It's a versatile case study template designed to enable critical reflection on how discrimination, oppression, and racism manifests in social work and beyond. It is a simple process for documenting, analysing, and addressing instances of bias, whether it is experienced directly, observed, or perpetrated by the person or people responsible. Shades of Bias embraces intersectionality and is underpinned by the protected characteristics, age, race, disability, sexual orientation, religion, etc., of the author or the person completing the template. And it's consistent with the Equality Act 2010. The template also captures more nuanced and multi-layered discrimination, such as classism, microaggressions, neurodiversity, sexism, etc. Based on anti-discriminatory, anti-oppressive, and anti-racist values and ethics, SOB helps to create a culture of accountability, inclusion, self-expression, and systemic change. Shades of Bias is more than just a tool for documenting racism. It's a multidimensional framework for healing, self-examination, and transformation across policy, practice, and education. Shades of Bias provides cathartic and therapeutic benefits, which empowers people to analyse and respond to experiences of bias and various forms of discrimination. By validating lived experiences, Shades of Bias is both a self-help resource and a practical tool, giving it a unique emotional and strategic function aimed at hearts and minds. It's intended for Shades of Bias to become the standardised framework for documenting discrimination and exposing harmful systemic patterns that are often ignored. And I've given a dictionary definition there at the bottom, just so we're clear on the working definition of bias throughout this presentation. And apologies for the wordy slide there. Here is a brief infographic just to consolidate what I've tried to convey in that previous slide. Shades of Bias is very much about promoting anti-discrimination, anti-oppression, and anti-racism. SOB, or Shades of Bias, serves three different groups. Firstly, victims or survivors of discrimination, oppression, or racism. It's cathartic and therapeutic, as I was saying before. For people who've experienced discrimination, oppression, and racism, Shades of Bias offers a way to process and validate their experiences, reducing the fear of dismissal or gaslighting. Writing about these incidents can help release emotional distress, allowing people to articulate their feelings in a constructive way. It helps victims and survivors to make sense of what's happened, recognise patterns of discrimination, and regain a sense of control over the narrative. By documenting their experiences, individuals can create a tangible record of injustice, which can be used to seek accountability, support, and/or systemic change. This approach reduces isolation as individuals see their experiences reflected in broader structural patterns, rather than as personal failures or isolated incidents. It's imperative that victims and survivors of discrimination, oppression, and racism access appropriate wellbeing networks, and I've listed a few there. Again, you'll get a copy of this presentation. There are hyperlinks there that will take you straight to the websites that I'm referring to. And there's also a list of wellbeing resources. So Shades of Bias also relates to witnesses and observers of discrimination, oppression, and racism. Often they feel uncertain about how to intervene. Shades of Bias provides a proactive method to acknowledge and challenge effectively. Witnesses and observers can document incidents without putting themselves at risk, ensuring that discrimination, oppression, racism doesn't go unnoticed and/or become normalised. Observers can contribute to a growing body of evidence that reveals patterns of systemic injustice professionally and in wider society. Shades of Bias supports active social justice, helping witnesses move from silent and passive observance to meaningful action. For many witnesses, speaking up against discrimination, oppression, and racism can be intimidating or professionally risky. Shades of Bias provides a safe, structured way to record and report incidents, making systemic change more achievable. And the final group is the person or people responsible for the bias. It provides a tool for accountability, critical reflection, and growth if people are honest enough with themselves to be able to, deal with that. So even well-intentioned people can exhibit bias. SOB provides a logical, non-punitive method for people to reflect on their own actions, inactions, and biases. People responsible for the bias are encouraged to analyse their decision-making and behaviours, recognising how instinctive and impulsive biases can influence professional judgment. By completing the template from their own perspective, people can confront how and why they perpetrated discrimination, oppression, or racism, and commit to learning and change. This process aims to convert guilt into being responsible and shame into taking accountability, cultivating a culture of growth rather than defensiveness. This approach helps shift from blame culture to a learning culture where people can actively deconstruct bias and commit to authentic and holistic social justice. Now, you'll be relieved I'm not going to cover this slide in great depth, but I just wanted to give you some idea of what the actual template looks like and the prompts involved. At this stage, the template is at the prototype stage, but it will be launched as a PDF, as a Word document, and as an online form as well. So those are the first three categories, and you'll have got a sense there of some of the prompts for people to make their particular notes on. These are the next couple of categories and the prompts related to those. You'll see that the prompts are very generic and they relate to all different aspects of intersectionality. I'll just move on. And these are the final sections. You'll see that there's a specific section on reflection and learning for the people or person responsible for bias also. So Shades of Bias is a practical, structured and reflective tool that empowers and equips people. Unlike many reports that merely outline problems or recommend solutions that are not implemented, Shades of Bias is a universal template to document, analyse and support people in real-world scenarios. And the final comment there is that if people completing the form or the template would like to share their completed case study with us, we are going to collate those. We're not going to make promises about publications at this stage, but we will collate them, and there is a possibility that we might look at some sort of publication in the future. But for the moment, it's really about giving people a tool that they can either use personally for their own private or personal use, or as part of some process that they might find themselves in, or as far as some of the other examples that I gave of how the template might be used. Just to consolidate some of what I said, because I'm very conscious that some of those slides were very wordy, I hope this infographic provides a visual insight into the concept. You'll see there that the purpose is to document and reflect on experiences of discrimination, oppression and racism related to the Equality Act 2010 or equivalent legislation. There's also a section specifically around the people involved, whether that be victims and survivors, or witnesses and observers, or people who are responsible for the bias. So the form is universal in that sense. The provision it provides is that it can inform policy, practice and education. It supports anti-discriminatory, anti-oppressive and anti-racist approaches. And it encourages systemic accountability. And the process is quite a simple one, and that there's simply a case study title, background and context, the nature of the incident, how the situation was handled, goodly or badly, the reflection and learning for everybody involved, and reflection and learning specifically for people or the person responsible for bias. So moving on, this is an advert for Shades of Bias, again to really illuminate what the concept hopes to reveal. The origins of Shades of Bias. It was developed by myself and the Black and Ethnic Minority Professionals Symposium and the Professional Capabilities and Development Group, and colleagues from the anti-racist movement arm and School of Shabs. Again, those links within the presentation will take you to their respective profiles online. I worked with those colleagues and partners following concerns raised by Black and Global Majority BASWA England members, including practice educators who reported racism with students and organisational practices, students themselves who reported racism in social work placements and academic settings, and newly qualified social workers who encountered racism in recruitment, everyday practice, career progression, and workplace cultures. These concerns were escalated through BASWA and representations made to key stakeholders and partners, highlighting systemic racism in social work education, early career pathways, and the relevance to regulatory frameworks. The development of Shades of Bias coincided with the publication of the Child Safeguarding Review Panel, its silent Race, Racism and Safeguarding Children report that was published just a few months ago, which highlighted a lack of accountability in addressing racism in safeguarding practices. Shades of Bias is also informed by BASWA's Code of Ethics, Social Work England's Professional Standards, and the Social Care Workforce Race and Equality Standards, which I assume are England specific, and you perhaps have equivalents in Ireland. Shades of Bias is a logical progression from the anti-racism in social work activities across the UK report that we published, and that was a time frame between 2020 and 2021. So I'm trying to sort of set, I guess, the context and the origins here for the development of the resource. But essentially, the lack of tangible reforms on anti-racism in social work underscores the need for a practitioner-led tool that empowers individuals to document and challenge all forms of discrimination in all settings, hence the conceptualization of the template. Shades of Bias is part of a wider Hearts and Minds campaign to promote social justice in social work. How it can be utilised more widely, I alluded to this earlier, in that some of the benefits relate to policy, practice and education. And these aren't an exhaustive list, but just to give you a flavour. So in terms of policy, it can be used as evidence in consultations to inform policies on community relations, workforce equality and social work education. It provides anonymised case studies that policymakers can use to develop social justice strategies. It aligns with existing initiatives like the social care res that I mentioned to collect data around discrimination and also to track patterns in relation to discrimination, oppression and racism. In terms of practice, it can help to shape it. Professionals can use it in terms of supervision, everyday practice, working with people, working in teams and organisations. It helps professionals assess their own decision-making and recognise patterns of discrimination, oppression and racism in service delivery. It serves as a continuous professional development tool that enables professionals to document their learning and improvement in ethical practice. And finally, in terms of education, it can enhance that through universities and training providers integrating Shades of Bias into programme delivery and student support to educate, empower and equip them. Students can use it to document their experiences, ensuring their concerns and learning about bias and discrimination are recorded for them to use as when necessary. And finally, it supports practice educators in assessing students fairly and equitably whilst being mindful of their own needs and biases that may affect their practice. I talked about the section specifically for people responsible for the bias and the accountability and growth and self-reflection that I hope to engender through this. So that specific section of the template supports people who've engaged in bias, discriminatory or oppressive actions and behaviours, whether knowingly or unwittingly. It has a structured, non-punitive approach to reflection, helping individuals take responsibility, learn and commit to anti-discriminatory, anti-racist and anti-oppressive practice. But why engage? I mean, obviously we are where we are geopolitically and globally at the moment for reasons that will be, shall we say, more obvious to some than others. So why engage? There's a wall of resistance there. Well, really, I suppose it's about being honest with oneself, isn't it, really, about where we're at in that journey of being ethical, being morally correct and, being professionals in terms of social work. I've listed here a few examples people might want to engage to recognise and understand any personal biases that they might have, to acknowledge and address the harm they may have caused, to align with professional ethics, as I said, and regulatory expectations, to contribute to a culture of accountability and systemic change. And when completing Shades of Bias, people responsible for the bias should focus on understanding their actions, what motivated their actions or decisions, were there any biases, stereotypes or assumptions at play? Were you aware of the potential impact at the time? And finally, the impact on others. How might those actions have been perceived? What harm, intentional or not, may have occurred? And how has this affected trust, relationships, or the workplace culture? It does require a lot of self-honesty. And I'm not going to, preach today and say that I'm perfect in every regard at this, because I'm certainly not. But it hopefully is a starting point for everybody. Here are a few more prompts for the people responsible for bias. I'll not cover each point, but each category is systemic and organizational influences, commitment to change, repair and move forward, and Shades of Bias encourages honest self-reflection, as I was saying, and it outlines the process there, which of course won't be exhaustive. By engaging meaningfully, people responsible for bias can move beyond defensiveness to take responsibility and contribute to their personal and professional growth that prioritizes justice, equality, and ethical practice. This is just a brief summary, but I know that I've laboured really the intentions behind Shades of Bias, so I'll let you just have a moment just to briefly skim that. The hope is that Shades of Bias becomes a conventional and always usable resource during incidents of social injustice. Here's another infographic which I hope consolidates it further, with a real emphasis on the reveal, reflect, and repair aspects. Here's another advert which I hope amplifies the message. And I mentioned that there were a number of relevant BASW England work streams, frameworks, and resources that we've developed and been involved in. This is just a collage, really, just to capture some of that. Thanks very much for listening to that presentation. I hope it was helpful. If I could come to Marta Antonisag now, then. Thanks for listening to that, everybody. Now, we said that we would have a very brief conversation around Marta and Nisag's views around Shades of Bias. They have had a copy of it prior to this, and we've had some correspondence around it. So, yes, could I come to you both, please?
Hi, Wayne, and thank you for that lovely presentation. So, as Wayne said, me and Nizar were very privileged because we got access to the prototype of the template that Wayne will launch eventually. And obviously, when there's a launch, we'll be happy to advertise through our own IASW, and we'll be happy for you to use it. And obviously, always go back to Wayne for feedback if you think something is not working or working well.
Yeah,
I'm sure it will be very appreciated. So, from my own side, when we were deciding the theme of this workshop and Wayne told me about this, I thought this is really interesting and fantastic because I never heard of something like this. I was brought back to my student social worker days where they teach you all the reflective models of Gibbs and all that. And I thought how many times they didn't suit many situations I dealt with, both as a student and as a professional. And because I remember especially one case, well, I work with a lot with refugees and asylum seekers, and I just felt like the reflective models that we are taught are so generalized that they didn't help me in those reflections. And when I was reading the Shade of Bias that Wayne is teaching us about, I kind of tried to go back and kind of think, how would I have thought about it with this template? And I felt like it suited so many different situations, both individually and in work, in meetings with the team. So I thought that was very interesting because it gives us a new model to reflect on something that hasn't been approached. From my knowledge, at least, I never found one that like oppresses anything about discrimination and oppression. And I think it's something that we really need. It is in our code of conduct as professionals that we need to practice anti-oppressive practice, but we are barely taught about it and barely any, well, tools or encouragements to do it. So I thought this was really great, and I really hope it takes over like social work and gets spread because I thought it was very useful. I thought it's, of course, I had more time to look at it than you now on the presentation, but I found the prompts very, very useful because I think one general question can be too general, and the prompts that Wayne has kind of tickles your brain to think about something you didn't think about, even though you're trying to reflect on. I think sometimes when you have a general question, it can be a bit overwhelming. Like, yeah, I mean, this happened, but you're so at loss sometimes. And the prompts, I found them very, very
good.
useful.
Excellent.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
found it
Thanks so
very
much.
useful guide.
Really
And,
appreciate that.
yeah, and I thought, like I said, I think it has huge potential, not just individually for yourself, but I was thinking about when I was working, especially with the asylums and refugees group, like in our staff meetings, we would talk a lot about it because racism would come up in almost every single case. So sometimes we would be talking in the meeting and like, oh, what we're gonna do? There's another problem with this in the neighborhood and this and that.
Yeah.
And I feel like many times we didn't get anywhere. We were just kind of venting and kind of like, well, it is what it is, I guess. And I
Yeah.
felt like we needed something like this to kind of guide us. Okay, what happened? Okay, and then, and what can we do? What's missing? What exists? So I feel like I said, I think it has huge potential to be both
So much.
individual and in group.
Yes.
Is there anything you'd like me to think more, reflect more about, Wayne?
No. I mean, thank you so much for your feedback. I mean, I'm absolutely bowled over by that, to be honest, because there's not many people who have had exposure to it outside of the team, really. You know, the working groups, I mentioned the different people involved. So this forum really is the first sort of initial feedback that we're getting. So on behalf of all that group, you know, I can guarantee you we'll all be really pleased about what you've had to say. So thank you. It's nice to get this love from Ireland, you know. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Nizar, would you like to come in and share your thoughts?
Yes. Thank you, Marta. Wayne, thanks a million for the excellent presentation and allowing Marta and I to partake in the prototype template exercise prior to this presentation. I must say that I found the template very useful. I have already used this in my practice with a case which was really troubling me. Which I'll come to in a minute or so. My observation for this template, it's nothing but excellent in breaking down the incident, where it happened, what happened, how it made you feel, people who were involved in, who were witnessing or who were survival of this incident or who were actually person who are causing concern. And then the emotion which one was experiencing if you are witnessing it or living that particular incident. You're noting down all that, you are naming it, you are naming the emotion, the discomfort, you are challenging yourself to think beyond what is visible. You are asking questions which are discomforting in so many ways. And then you move towards accountability. You move toward what are you going to do about it? Who are you going to ask for help? Who are you going to get involved in addressing this issue? This might be your team leader or your organization or your colleague or external agency. So this template actually allows you to think beyond which your normal incident reporting would allow, or even process recording in social work or critical incident recording if I go back to my college days a few years back. So this template is really useful in that particular sense where it puts accountability, and also it gives that space for us to, as you said, reveal, reflect, and repair. Again, this template is solution focused. It doesn't just talk about the problem. It talks about what you are going to do about the problem. The only observation I had, which was discomforting to me, was that what if no one believes you? What if you face with non-supportive team leader or a colleague who is not on your side? And then you have to sit with all this process of recording everything, and then you are faced with disappointment at the end.
Yes, I hear that observation. It's definitely a valid one. I suppose the thinking behind shades bias is that it's not necessarily a form or a template that somebody will complete and have to do something with it. I'm an advocate of journaling, for example. It's not something that I managed to maintain substantially myself, but I am an advocate of it in the sense that writing down and articulating our feelings or incidents or things that have affected us has a sort of benefit really on lots of different levels. So there's an element of shades of bias, I think, where it could be used as a sort of journal, where somebody who's completing it might not actually do anything with that information. It could be like a confidential sort of diary almost of incidents, So he's multi-purpose in that sense. But I do hear what you're saying around the, with that catharsis and that externalization of feelings, sometimes we are left where we do need support from that. And my hope is that by filling the form out where people need that sort of support, it really crystallizes it for them. And they think, oh, actually, having filled that out, I realize now I do need to go and speak to someone. I do need to, confide in someone. Whereas otherwise, there's a tendency to maybe just hold it in because we've not been able to process it. But hopefully by processing it, it allows people to, make that conscious decision. That would be my view.
Thanks, Wayne. Yeah, and certainly journaling your discomfort, and
Yes.
especially when it involves prejudice or biases, incidents of racism. And I would see this template being used beyond social work. Any human service organization, when you are helping vulnerable patient clients, I think, allied healthcare professional also could use this template. We know prejudice, bias is part of our society.
Yeah.
Discrimination happen on a daily basis, and we witness it, we live with it. Some of us, different kind of discrimination, and it's not just singular about the racism.
That's right.
Discrimination based on disability or your sexual orientation, or your mental health. All is relevant, when you are recording this. So certainly, I feel this template has a great potential, and the shades of biases would cover, all different shades in our practice in terms of biases. Yes, and just to share with my experience, using this template more recently to everyone who is in attendance now. I'm based in Northeast inner city, primary care, supporting families who are sending their children to schools. And I work with Roma families, families from Roma communities, and they would find it, difficult to communicate in English. And for that matter, I need to get an interpreter who speaks Romanian, because Roma interpreters are in scarcity in Ireland. So you don't find Roma interpreters, Romanian interpreters. Romanian interpreters are likely to be from Romania, working as interpreter here in Ireland, in Dublin. And then they would come with their own biases against Roma community. So I had experienced this during my session, and other MDT members, when they were using this particular company, they were sending a particular staff to translate because they were allocated for this area. Yeah. And it was already discussed from the MDT members that they found this interpreter not very helpful. They were over-speaking the clients. They were not really, translating what exactly they were saying during the session. And this happened in my session where I was aware that this might happen, and it brought those emotions, which probably I tried to bury, of racial profiling, by seeing someone or being from ethnic minority community. During the interpretation of the session translation, they mentioned that, these people are like that, or they'll continue asking for more if you give them more. So these were the kind of thoughts this particular staff member has. And then I brought this back using this. I was fortunate enough that I had time to go back to my line manager and mention this to them. And I faced with something which was very unusual. The public service organization I work for has a tender with this particular company, and they have only one interpreter for this area. So not much can be done because they are a third-party vendor. So we can't do much about it. Yeah. So I felt powerless. Not only just during the session, but after as well, that I couldn't do much about it apart from just recording it, Yeah. So that's where the limitation part I was reflecting. Yes. This discomfort. Where will I go with it now?
Yeah. I guess the reality of some situations is that we meet a real cul-de-sac, isn't it? But hopefully by filling the format, it just allows people to, kind of make some sense of it, I suppose, in some way, to actually see it for what it is, at least. And, situations like that sometimes replicate themselves. And then, when you find yourself in a similar situation, maybe you're that little bit more equipped in terms of what you're dealing with, and it may be that there is opportunity to change things at that point. You'll be that little bit more equipped then, hopefully.
Absolutely.
But I have to emphasize that shades of bias isn't a kind of silver bullet. It's not going to fix everybody's problems as much as I would love it to. I'd love it to solve world peace, trust me. But the hope really is just that it provides some comfort, some justice, some empowerment to people when they most need it, really.
And I would just add to that I was thinking a lot about that as well when I was checking the template. And one thing I thought was like, the more you reflect, I think the more you understand and the more you actually want to do something about it. While normally, even if we know something, for example, was discrimination, we might just be like, this again, it is what it is. But once you reflect, you kind of start thinking more about it. And the more you think deeply about something, the more you want to change things.
Yeah.
So I think it still has that kind of push to kind of see where can you go from there, even if it's just sometimes more cathartic than anything else. But I also thought many times in our events, people ask us what can they bring to their office to change the workplace. And I was thinking about that a lot when I was doing the template. And I thought, for example, when I was a medical social worker in a hospital here, I thought that we had this thing where once a month we would do kind of a CPD among us. So one of us would bring something and we would use it and talk about it and all that. Right. And I thought, for example, I know many social workers do that as well. That would be a great way of being very sneaky and bringing that to your office. Bring that and be like, oh, let's try to use this and see what can we come up with, and that can highlight things to people in your team that might not have thought about it. If you start using it every once in a while with your team and there's a pattern coming up, you can start working as a team thinking, there's something that comes up all the time, isn't it? So there is a lot of potential, I think, to use it for action as well, even if you have to be a bit sneaky bringing it.
Possibly,
but
I mean, you
sometimes
say sneaky. I would say perhaps just, there's a degree of protection, isn't there, that people need? Inherent with injustice is this kind of, people being treated really badly when they do speak up about it. So, one of the things I think is important with shades of bias is the anonymity around it.
Definitely.
I've always been an advocate for sort of honesty boxes within organisations. Some are more receptive to that than others, but honesty boxes where the workforce can anonymously, put their feelings and comments on a note in a box. And, the senior leadership does actually take note of that and does communicate with the organisation around, themes that they're picking up and so on. So part of my sort of input into shades of bias or the thinking was on those sort of lines, really, offering people or providing a degree of protection to them if they do choose to, to share their case study. Thank you so much for your input. That is so refreshing and heartwarming to know that, you're kind of on board with this and you like it. So thank you. Are there any other comments from anybody else on the call or in the group?
Should we open the floor to people and what were your thoughts? I know you didn't have as much detail as me and Nizar, but we would love to hear from you. And if you're looking forward to see this template being launched, Miriam said, not sneaky, rather strategic and innovative to bring template to team meeting trainings. Yes, exactly.
That's true,
but if anyone would either unmute themselves or just write on the chat, feel free to go ahead.
Please don't be shy. I mean, just as a thumbs up or thumbs down or, midway, what would the consensus in the room be from what you've heard so far?
I see Laurie hasn't muted herself. Are you getting ready?
Yes. I'm thinking about Nisarg's situation and how incredibly frustrating that is. And then the honesty box idea made me think about, and the sneaky comment, could you suggest like an annual review of the interpreter services where feedback is given and, general feedback about what you want interpreters to do, which is, my experience as a professional interpreter says what you said to the client and says what the client said to you and does not get involved with values and judgment and stuff. And so, to be able to present that sort of thing in a way that hopefully won't make somebody defensive, but can let somebody hear that we're not getting what we need to work with the client when we don't hear the client's voice through the interpreter. I'm just thinking that this whole process of documenting and reflecting can help you to get so much more creative about your response. Even, I mean, you would hope that a social worker would be open,
Definitely.
but that's not always true.
No.
But maybe an interpreter is not going to necessarily have the same professional values or ethics, and if it's hard enough to do with other social workers, it could be even harder with somebody else. But this framework seems exciting for leading to more creativity.
Thank you. Thanks for that feedback on those points, Laurie. Yeah, really great points, well made.
Katie also said on the chat, I think maybe general anti-racism training would be good for our organizations first, and then gradually introduce a template. That's a good point, Katie, because I was actually thinking that, well, as Laurie was also mentioning, social workers normally tend to believe they want to do the best they can and they're good people, but we're not immune to our biases. No one is, none of us are perfect. So it is something that, for example, if you don't that you have a bias, maybe you wouldn't really feel the need to fill the template.
Yeah, I'll just say where I'm coming from. It's just because of let's say the demands on staff, the level of work, the kind of waiting lists, all that. I think the template's really, really good and I'd feel comfortable using it. But I think to bring it in just generally on the general topic of cultural issues, anti-racism, etc., from my point of view, I think would work better. And then gradually, kind of maybe every 3 months, sort of have a meeting, maybe with a case study, bringing staff in. Because I think, like, in terms of even child protection, that's kind of the way we do, maybe once or twice a year. And I think staff in particular are very interested in case scenarios. And it is something that I tried to bring in with child protection and cultural issues the last time, but we ran out of time. So, I think maybe combining the two would be very good as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Do you do any outside training? I mean, training outside England yourself, or?
No, I don't. I'm employed by BASWA, and all of this work really I do under that banner. But lots of colleagues, lots of members and people within the orbit and the network who do. So if there are specific trainers, that you would like to commission, by all means get in touch.
Sure. Sorry, I don't mean to go off subject, but thank you very much. It was very good. Thank you.
It's a very good point, Katie, and I think me and Izar try to highlight this every that if anyone ever wants more training or something very specific, feel free to reach out to us, because we have given training to some groups, some even university for students, placements and things like that. So Izar just wrote our email there. So if anyone wants something like that, feel free to email us, and Wayne will be launching the template in about 2 weeks or so.
Hopefully so. Yeah, it's not currently available, but it's we're getting towards the final versions. So yeah,
it would be lovely to incorporate his template in our trainings in the future when it's launched. So it's something that we could maybe work with Wayne to prepare something, and then we would introduce training for your workplace, because we feel like in the past we tried to advertise it and it didn't work as well as people coming to us saying they want training.
Specific. I think you just have to know your organization quite well.
And bringing more tailored training, like you said, specific cases that can be applied to that specific workplace.
So exactly.
Do get our email and save it for us. If you ever want to get in contact to do something like that, we'll be delighted to.
Okay, thank you.
You're going to say something, I think.
Yes, please. I was just going to say that, yeah, in terms of shades of bias, it will be a kind of free resource available on the BASWorth website, as are some of the other resources that we have. Generally, in the sense that it's a sort of hearts and minds campaign, as I said during the presentation, and as social workers, there's a real core kind of connection with all of this. So it will be a free resource. And I guess for IASW and this group, the recording of this session could be the first step in the ladder, basically, if it's something that you wanted to incorporate. Do you see what I mean? And I see this as the beginning of a sort of partnership, I suppose, with IASW on this, that you've kindly invited me to speak and engage with this concept and this resource. So for me, let's keep it going. And it would be nice, really, for this recording maybe not in its entirety, but some core aspects of it to be available online, so that again it can be used as a resource and it will complement the Shades of Bias template as well. So yeah.
Any last comments before we go today?
I was just going to come in and say one of the areas that has come up repeatedly as a need over the past number of years is that idea around support for bystanders. And in many ways, I think that this can address that need in lots of ways. And I think one of the benefits of the tool really is that it's something that you can do on your own as a reflective practice tool, but also something that you can share. So it could be useful for us as an association in addressing that need, because as I said, that's something that's come up repeatedly for people, where whether it's been in CPD opportunities around allyship or whatever, but just knowing how to go on and how to put words on experiences that can be just, you may feel that you don't really have a language to describe or to articulate. The second piece that struck me a lot in relation to this is so if it was something that's used with peers or in trusted line management situations, I do think it's useful that this is a tool when completed, that whoever completes it keeps themselves.
Yeah.
It doesn't become something that's part of an organization. I suppose I'm a bit of a worst case scenario person. I think of the worst case scenario and I work backwards from that, and then I know it's okay. So just because people may have concerns about fitness to practice, are they documenting how they're engaging in anti-discriminatory practice, or because our code of professional conduct and ethics requires that we don't condone discrimination by others. So even if you're looking at completing this from the perspective of a bystander, rather than somebody who's reflecting on how they may have been biased in an encounter or an interaction or on an ongoing basis. I think it's just that piece there, I think could be useful for people to think about that this is for me.
Yeah, definitely. And to keep it private if necessary, and that's really been the intention, to make it as universal, as accessible to anyone and everyone. At some stage in everybody's lives, they're going to experience either discrimination, oppression, or racism. Unfortunately, that's a reality. So it really is just something that will not fix the problem, but will hopefully be part of the solution for people. There's just a couple of quick things I wanted to mention, if that's okay. Obviously, I've rambled on quite a lot in my presentation about shades of bias and, what it is and the function, etc. But there is going to be 2 sets of guidance alongside the template. There will be a detailed guidance for those of us who are, a bit geeky, really, and who want to know the real nuts and bolts of it. And then for those who are busy, perhaps who've got very limited time or just don't want to do a deep dive, there will be a brief version as well. There's a few infographics for people who are visual learners. So again, we've tried to make it as accessible for people in that regard as well, rather than it be a one-size-fits-all kind of approach. So yeah. Thanks again for having me this afternoon. I can't believe the amount of love that I've had. It's really made my Friday. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much. Nizar, do you want to say anything before I close the event?
Yeah, just to mention that, Wayne, thank you very much for facilitating this CPD workshop on behalf of the Anti-Racism Advisory Group. We are delighted to be in your presence and learning really shades of bias from you. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, and I salute everybody. Yeah.
And for those who couldn't make the workshop but they are watching the recording, I just want to reiterate, please do reach out to our group. We are more than happy to provide trainings, information, guidance on, or even future CPD that you feel like is missing. So you can email us at arag@isw@gmail.com. If you want to register with our group, even just to keep up with what's going on, what's coming up, you can email ISW office and they'll register you into our group. It's been a really delightful lunch afternoon in a Friday, a perfect way of ending the week. Thank you so much again, Wayne, and we'll look forward for the template and look forward to promote it here and also to stay in touch.
Definitely.
Have a lovely weekend, everyone.
Most definitely. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Marta. Bye everyone.